My dad tried to force me to let my lazy stepsister move into my house so he and his wife could retire, and when I said no, he threatened to contest my grandparents' will and sell my property, but I proved he had no legal rights. My father is 61 and his wife is 58. They have been married for about 15 years now. My mother passed away when I, 32F, was 14, and he remarried pretty quickly after that. His wife brought her daughter Nina, 31F, into the picture. Nina and I were never close growing up. We lived in the same house for a few years, but we barely spoke to each other. She had her life and I had mine. The house I currently live in belonged to my grandparents on my mother's side. They raised me for a good chunk of my childhood because my mother was working 2 jobs after the divorce. My father was not around much. He paid child support, but that was about it. When my grandparents passed away, they left the house to me in their will. I was 23 at the time. The house is in a good neighborhood and it has appreciated in value over the years. My husband and I have been living here for the past 6 years. We got married young and this house gave us a solid start. He works in finance and I run a small consulting business from home. We do well for ourselves. My father and I have a functional relationship. We talk maybe once a month. He calls to check in or to ask about holidays. It is surface level. He was not a bad father, but he was not particularly involved either. He showed up to my high school graduation and my wedding. That was about the extent of his participation in my life. I accepted that a long time ago. I do not expect much from him and he does not expect much from me. Last Monday he called me in the morning. I was making breakfast and I saw his name on the screen. I almost did not pick up because I was busy, but I figured it might be important. He started the conversation by asking how I was doing and how my husband was. I answered politely. Then he got to the point. He said he and his wife were planning to retire early. They wanted to sell their current house and buy an RV. They were going to travel around the country for a few years. He said it was something they had been dreaming about for a long time. I congratulated him. I told him it sounded like a great plan. Then he said there was one small issue they needed to figure out before they could go. He said Nina was going through a rough time. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend and she was between jobs. He said she needed a place to stay for a while until she got back on her feet. He said it would be temporary. Maybe 6 months or so. He asked if she could move into my house. I did not say anything right away. I was trying to process what he was asking. He kept talking. He said the house had extra bedrooms. He said my husband and I did not have kids, so we had plenty of space. He said it was what families did for each other. He said Nina just needed some support during a difficult time. He made it sound like it was already decided. Like I was just supposed to agree. I told him I needed to think about it. He sounded annoyed. He said there was nothing to think about. He said Nina had already started packing. He said they were planning to list their house in 2 weeks. I asked why Nina could not just stay in their house while they were traveling. He said they were selling it. I asked why she could not get her own apartment. He said she did not have the money right now. I asked why she did not have a job. He said she was looking, but it was taking time. Then I brought up the fact that Nina had a history of not working. When she lived with us as a teenager, she did not have a part-time job like I did. After high school, she enrolled in community college but dropped out after 1 semester. She moved back in with them. She got a job at a retail store but quit after a few months. She said the manager was mean. Then she got another job at a restaurant but quit that one too. She said the hours were bad. She has had maybe 5 or 6 jobs in the past 10 years and none of them lasted more than a year. My father and his wife have been supporting her the entire time. I also brought up something that happened a few years ago. Nina came to visit us for Thanksgiving. My husband and I hosted dinner. Nina spent the entire evening making comments about how nice our house was. She asked my husband a lot of questions about his job. She kept touching his arm when she talked to him. At one point she asked him if he wanted to go for a walk outside. He said no. After she left, he told me he felt uncomfortable. He said she was being flirty. I brushed it off at the time, but it stuck with me. When my father asked me to let her move and that memory came back. I told my father I did not think it was a good idea. I said Nina and I were not close. I said my husband would not be comfortable with it. He got quiet. Then he said he was disappointed in me. He said he raised me better than this. I reminded him that my mother and my grandparents raised me. He did not like that. He said I was being disrespectful. He said family was supposed to help family. I said I was not saying no permanently. I just needed time to talk to my husband about it. That is when he said something that made my blood run cold. He said if I was not going to help Nina, then he would have to find another way to fund their retirement. He said the house I was living in was technically still part of the family estate. He said he could contest the will if he wanted to. He said he could force a sale and take his share. He said if I did not take Nina in, he would start the legal process. He said he had already talked to a lawyer about it. I did not say anything for a few seconds. Then I started laughing. I could not help it. He asked what was so funny. I told him he could try to contest the will if he wanted, but it would not go anywhere. The house was left to me directly by my grandparents. My mother was already deceased by the time they passed. My father was never married to my mother when they died. He was not related to them. He had no legal claim to anything they owned. The will was airtight. I had checked with my own lawyer when I inherited it. He went silent. I could hear him breathing on the other end. I told him he was welcome to waste his money on a lawyer, but it would not change anything. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my phone. My husband came downstairs and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. He was furious. He said we were not letting Nina move in under any circumstances. He said my father had a lot of nerve-making threats like that. The rest of the day I felt numb. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. I could not believe my father had tried to manipulate me like that. I could not believe he thought he could threaten me into doing what he wanted. I also could not believe he was so willing to throw me under the bus for his retirement plans. That night I got a text from his wife. She said my father was very upset. She said I had hurt his feelings. She said they were just trying to plan for their future and I was being selfish. She said Nina was family and I should want to help her. I did not respond. I put my phone on silent and went to bed. The next day I woke up to 17 missed calls. Most of them were from my father. A few were from his wife. There were also texts from relatives I had not heard from in years. Cousins. Aunts. People I barely knew. They all said the same thing. They said I was being cruel. They said I had a big house and I should share it. They said Nina was going through a hard time and I should help her. Some of them said I was acting like I was better than everyone else just because I had money. One of my cousins said I was a spoiled brat who did not appreciate what I had. I realized my father and his wife had sent out some kind of mass message. They had told everyone their version of the story. They had made me look like the villain. I was furious. I wanted to call each person back and explain what really happened, but my husband told me not to. He said they were not worth the energy. He said if they believed my father without even asking for my side, then they were not real family anyway. Around noon I got a text from Nina. She said she heard I was refusing to let her stay with me. She said she could not believe I would do that to her. She said she had already told all her friends she was moving into her sister's beautiful house. She said she had posted about it on social media. She said now she looked like an idiot because I was backing out. She said I owed her. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked her number. An hour later I got a call from his wife again. This time I answered. She did not even say hello. She just started yelling. She said I was ruining their plans. She said they had already put a deposit down on the RV. She said they could not afford to keep supporting Nina anymore. She said they had spent thousands of dollars on her over the years. She said Nina kept losing jobs and needing money for rent and bills. She said they were drowning financially. She said if I did not take Nina in they would have to cancel their retirement plans. She said it was my fault. I let her finish. Then I said if they were that broke maybe they should not be buying an RV. She said it was none of my business how they spent their money. I said it became my business when they tried to dump their responsibilities on me. She said Nina was not a responsibility. She was family. I said if Nina was 31 years old and still could not support herself, that was their problem, not mine. She started crying. She said I was heartless. Then she hung up. I sat there holding my phone. My husband brought me a glass of water. He said we should consider changing our numbers. I agreed. But I also realized something. They were not going to stop. They were going to keep calling. They were going to keep sending relatives after me. They were going to keep trying to manipulate me. I needed to do something to make it clear that I was not going to change my mind. That evening, I drafted an email. I sent it to my father, his wife, and Nina. I said I would not be taking Nina into my home. I said the decision was final. I said any further attempts to pressure me would result in me cutting off contact completely. I said I would not be responding to calls or texts from extended family members who did not know the full story. I said if they continued to harass me I would consider legal action. I hit send and then I blocked all 3 of their numbers. My husband and I spent the rest of the week in peace. No calls. No texts. It was quiet. I thought maybe they had finally gotten the message. Update 1: I did not expect to post an update, but things have gotten worse. A lot worse. 3 days after I sent that email, my father and Nina showed up at my house. It was a Saturday morning. My husband was out running errands. I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell ring. I looked through the window and saw them standing on the porch. My father had his arms crossed. Nina was holding a suitcase. I did not open the door. I called out through the window and asked what they wanted. My father said we needed to talk. I said there was nothing to talk about. He said he was not leaving until I let them in. I said I would call the police if they did not leave. Nina started crying. She said she had nowhere else to go. She said her boyfriend kicked her out and she had been staying on a friend's couch for the past week. She said the friend told her she had to leave. She said she was desperate. I stood there looking at them through the glass. Part of me wanted to open the door. Part of me wanted to help. But then I remembered the text she sent. I remembered her saying she had told everyone she was moving in with me. I remembered my father threatening to contest the will. I stayed where I was. My father started talking again. He said he was sorry for how things went. He said he should not have threatened me. He said he was just stressed about money. He said he did not mean it. He said we were family and family forgave each other. He said all I had to do was let Nina stay for a few months. He said it was not a big deal. He said the house was big enough. He said I would barely even notice she was there. I asked Nina what her plan was. I asked if she had a job lined up. She said she was working on it. I asked her what that meant. She said she had submitted some applications. I asked how many. She said a few. I asked if she had heard back from any of them. She said not yet. I asked when she submitted the applications. She did not answer. My father told her not to worry about it. He said she would find something eventually. He said the important thing was that she had a safe place to stay. I told Nina she could not stay with me if she did not have a plan. I told her I was not going to support her indefinitely. She said she just needed a little time. I asked her how much time. She said she did not know. I asked her what she had been doing for the past 3 weeks. She said she had been busy dealing with a breakup. I asked if she had been looking for work. She did not answer. My father got angry. He said I was interrogating her. He said I was being cruel. He said Nina was going through a hard time and I was making it worse. I said I was trying to understand the situation. He said there was nothing to understand. He said Nina needed help and I should help her. I said I was not obligated to help her. He said I was living in a house that should have gone to him. I laughed. I said the house was never his. I said my grandparents left it to me and there was nothing he could do about it. That is when Nina spoke up. She said she did not understand. She said she thought the house was part of my father's family. I told her the house belonged to my mother's parents. I told her my father had no connection to them. I told her he had no legal claim. She looked at my father. He did not say anything. She asked him if that was true. He said it was complicated. She said it did not sound complicated. She said it sounded like he lied to her. She turned back to me. She said she had been counting on living here. She said she had turned down other options because she thought this was a sure thing. I asked what other options. She said she could have stayed with her ex. I said I thought her ex kicked her out. She said he did, but she could have apologized and gotten back together with him. I said that did not sound like a good option. She said it was better than nothing. My father told her to stop talking. He said I was twisting her words. He said I was trying to make her look bad. I said she was doing that on her own. He said I had no right to judge her. He said I had been handed everything on a silver platter. He said I did not know what it was like to struggle. I said I knew exactly what it was like to struggle. I said my mother worked 2 jobs to support me. I said my grandparents took me in because he was not around. He said that was not fair. I said it was the truth. He stepped closer to the door. He said if I did not let Nina in he would never speak to me again. He said I would be dead to him. I looked at him through the glass. I said that was fine. I said I had been doing perfectly well without him for most of my life. I said I would continue to do well without him. He stared at me. Then he turned around and walked back to his car. Nina stood there for a moment. She said I would regret this. Then she followed him. I locked the door and sat down on the floor. My husband came home 20 minutes later. He found me sitting there. I told him what happened. He said we should change the locks just in case. We did that the same day. On Monday I got a call from a real estate agent. She said she was calling about the listing for my house. I said I had not listed my house. She said someone had contacted her office claiming to be the owner. She said they had provided an address and asked for a market evaluation. She said she drove by the property and noticed it did not have a for sale sign. She said she wanted to confirm before moving forward. I told her I was the sole owner. I told her no one had permission to list the property. She apologized. She said she would note that in her system. She said someone had likely tried to commit fraud. I called my lawyer immediately. He said I should file a police report. I did. The officer who took the report said there was not much they could do unless I had proof of who made the call. I said I was pretty sure it was my father. The officer said I would need evidence. I did not have any. I left the station feeling frustrated. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened. My husband suggested we get a security camera for the front door. We ordered one online and it arrived 2 days later. We set it up that same day. The real estate agent called me again the next week. She said the same person had called back. She said they were insistent. She said they claimed there had been a misunderstanding. She said they wanted to move forward with the listing. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. She said she would save the contact information from her caller ID and send it to me. It was my father's number. I took the information to the police. They said they would look into it. I have not heard back yet. My lawyer said even if they did investigate it would be hard to prove intent to commit fraud unless my father had forged documents. He said the best thing I could do was make sure all my property records were up to date and secure. I did that. Around this time, I also started thinking about the future. I realized I did not want to live in this house anymore. It had too many memories now. Every time I walked through the front door I thought about my father and Nina standing on the porch. Every time my phone rang I expected it to be another relative yelling at me. My husband and I talked about it. He said if I wanted to move he was on board. He said we could afford it. We started looking at houses in other towns. We found one we liked about 2 hours away. It was bigger. It was newer. It was in a neighborhood where no one knew us. We put in an offer. It was accepted. We decided not to tell anyone. We did not tell my father or his wife or Nina. We did not even tell the relatives who had been harassing me. We just quietly started packing. We hired movers. We set a closing date for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, we listed my grandparents' house for sale. The market was good. We had 3 offers within a week. We accepted the highest one. The buyer wanted to close quickly. We agreed. Everything moved fast after that. We packed up the house. We said goodbye to our neighbors. We closed on both properties within 2 days of each other. By the time my father found out we were already moved into the new house. Update 2: I thought things would calm down after we moved. I was wrong. My father found out about the sale 2 weeks after we closed. I do not know how he found out. Maybe one of the neighbors told him. Maybe he drove by the house and saw the sold sign. Either way he got my new number somehow. He called me at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was still in bed. I saw an unknown number and almost did not answer. But something told me to pick up. He did not even let me say hello. He started yelling immediately. He said I had sold the house. He said I had no right to do that. He said it was a family home. He said my grandparents would be ashamed of me. I let him yell for about 30 seconds. Then I hung up. He called back. I did not answer. He called 5 more times. I blocked the number. An hour later his wife called from a different number. I answered because I did not recognize it. She said they needed the money from the house sale. She said they had been counting on it. I asked her why they thought they were entitled to any of it. She said because my father was my family. I said he had no legal claim. She said it did not matter. She said morally the money should be shared. I asked her how much she thought she was owed. She said at least half. I laughed. I said the house sold for just under $900,000. I said she thought she was entitled to $450,000 of my money. She said it was not my money. It was family money. I said she was delusional. Then I hung up. The calls did not stop. Over the next few days I got calls from 6 different numbers. Some of them were my father. Some were his wife. One was Nina. I blocked all of them. Then I got an email. It was from my father. He said he was going to sue me. He said he had talked to a lawyer. He said the lawyer told him he had a case. He said I had 1 week to transfer half the sale proceeds into his account or he would take me to court. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. He called me that afternoon. He said my father did not have a case. He said the will was clear. He said my grandparents had left the house to me and me alone. He said even if my father tried to sue it would be thrown out immediately. He said I should not engage with my father at all. He said any communication should go through him. I agreed. I sent my father one final email. I told him all future communication should go through my lawyer. I included my lawyer's contact information. I said if he continued to contact me directly, I would seek a restraining order. I hit send and then I blocked his email address. 2 weeks later I got a call from my lawyer. He said my father had contacted him. He said my father was threatening to sue unless I gave him $300,000. My lawyer told him that was not going to happen. My father then said he would settle for $100,000. My lawyer told him no. My father hung up. My lawyer said he did not think my father would actually file a lawsuit. He said it would cost him money he probably did not have. He said it was likely just a bluff. I tried to move on. My husband and I focused on settling into the new house. We painted the walls. We bought new furniture. We planted a garden in the backyard. It was peaceful. For the first time in months I started to relax. Then one night I got a message on social media from someone I did not know. It was a woman around my age. She said her name was Rebecca. She said she used to date Nina's ex-boyfriend. She said she heard about what happened with my family. She said she wanted to tell me something. I was skeptical but I responded. I asked her what she wanted to tell me. She said Nina's ex-boyfriend broke up with her because of me. I said I did not understand. She said the ex-boyfriend had seen how I handled my father's demands. She said he told Nina that she should be more independent like me. She said he told Nina she relied on other people too much. She said he told Nina he was tired of supporting her. She said the breakup was not because of cheating or fighting. It was because Nina could not take care of herself. She said after the breakup Nina started telling people it was my fault. She said Nina told her friends that I had poisoned her boyfriend against her. She said Nina claimed I had always been jealous of her. Rebecca said she did not believe any of it. She said she knew Nina had a history of blaming other people for her problems. She said she wanted me to know the truth. I thanked her for reaching out. I said I appreciated her telling me. She said she hoped I was doing okay. I said I was. We have not talked since. A week later I got another email from my father. It came from a new email address. He said Nina was living in his car. He said his wife had kicked Nina out because they could not afford to support her anymore. He said Nina had nowhere to go. He said it was my fault. He said if I had just let her stay with me none of this would have happened. He said I had destroyed his family. He said he would never forgive me. I read the email 3 times. Then I deleted it. I did not respond. My husband asked if I was okay. I said I was. He asked if I believed what my father said about Nina. I said I did not know. I said even if it was true it was not my responsibility. We did not hear anything for another month. Then one night we got a notification from our security camera. Someone was at the front door. I pulled up the app on my phone. It was Nina. She was alone. She was standing on the porch holding a backpack. She knocked on the door. I did not answer. She knocked again. She waited for a few minutes. Then she left. I checked the camera footage the next morning. She had come back 3 more times during the night. Each time she knocked. Each time she waited. Each time she left. I saved the footage. My lawyer said I should file for a restraining order. I said I would think about it. Update 3 I got the restraining order. It took about 3 weeks to go through. Nina did not contest it. The judge granted it based on the camera footage and the history of harassment. Nina is not allowed to come within 500 feet of me or my property. My father and his wife were not included in the order because they had not shown up at the new house. But I made it clear to my lawyer that if they did I would add them. After the restraining order was issued things finally got quiet. I have not heard from any of them in over a month. No calls. No emails. No social media messages. My husband and I have been able to enjoy our new home without looking over our shoulders. Last week I ran into one of my cousins at the grocery store. She was one of the people who had sent me angry texts after my father spread his version of the story. She saw me in the produce section. She walked over and said she wanted to apologize. She said she had talked to my mother's sister recently. My aunt had told her the truth about the house and about my grandparents. She said she did not realize my father had been lying. She said she felt terrible for believing him. I told her it was fine. She asked if we could get coffee sometime. I said maybe. I have not reached out to her. I do not think I will. Some bridges are not worth rebuilding. My husband got a promotion at work last month. We celebrated by taking a weekend trip to the mountains. It was the first time in months I did not think about my father or Nina or any of it. We hiked. We had dinner at a small restaurant. We watched the sunset from our hotel room. It was quiet. It was exactly what I needed. I still think about my grandparents sometimes. I think about the house they left me. I think about how hard they worked to give me something stable. I know they would have understood why I sold it. I know they would have wanted me to be happy and safe. That is what I have now. A home that is truly mine. A life that is not weighed down by people who only see me as a resource. My father sent one last email about a week ago. It was short. He said he hoped I was happy. He said I had gotten what I wanted. He said he and his wife were not going to be able to retire now. He said Nina was staying with a friend in another state. He said he hoped I could live with my choices. I did not respond. I deleted the email and moved on. I am not waiting for an apology. I am not waiting for them to understand. I am just living my life. My husband and I are talking about starting a family in the next year or 2. We have the space now. We have the stability. We have peace. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2 My ancestry DNA results led to my grandfather meeting the son he never knew existed, but when the son's wife got cancer my grandfather moved in to help them and never came back, choosing his new family over the son who actually raised him and cared for him. I need to write this down because nobody would believe this if I told them in person. 3 weeks ago I was a normal college student with what I thought was a pretty standard family. Now I'm living in a motel room and half my relatives won't speak to each other. Let me start from the beginning. I, 20M, live with my mom Patricia, 48F, my dad William, 52M, and my grandfather Robert, 74M. My grandfather moved in with us about 5 years ago after my grandmother died. He had nowhere else to go and my dad insisted we take him in. My dad and grandfather have always been really close. They work on cars together every weekend, watch old war movies, and my grandfather taught my dad everything he knows about carpentry. My family has always been tight. We do Sunday dinners every week where my mom cooks way too much food and my grandfather tells the same stories about his time in the Navy. My dad runs a small construction company and my grandfather still helps out sometimes even though he's supposed to be retired. They built our back deck together last summer and you could see how proud my dad was to be working alongside his father. The whole mess started because of a college assignment. I'm taking a genetics class and our professor offered extra credit if we did one of those ancestry DNA tests and wrote a report about our results. The test cost $79 and I figured it would be easy points. My mom thought it was interesting, so she decided to do one too. My dad wasn't interested, but my grandfather got excited about it. He said he always wondered about his family history since he was adopted as a baby and never knew his birth parents. We ordered 3 kits in early February. The whole process was simple enough. We spit in the tubes, mailed them back, and waited about 6 weeks for results. My mom got hers first and it was exactly what we expected. Irish and German mostly, with some English mixed in. Nothing surprising there since that's what she always told us about her family. My results came back a few days later. Also, pretty standard stuff. I matched with my mom as expected and showed the same ethnic background as her on that side. Everything looked normal. My grandfather's results arrived the following week and that's when things got weird. I was helping him look through his DNA relatives section because he's not great with computers. We found several people who seemed to be his cousins and second cousins. But then we found something strange. There was a man named Thomas, 51M, who showed up as sharing 31.4% DNA with my grandfather. The relationship prediction said father and son. My grandfather stared at the screen for a long time. He said that couldn't be right because he was 74 years old. This Thomas person was only 51. There was no way my grandfather could be his father. We figured it had to be some kind of mistake with the testing. But then I looked closer at Thomas's profile. His last name was Henderson, same as my grandfather's adopted family name. I clicked through to his family tree and saw something that made my stomach drop. Thomas had listed my grandfather's name as his father. Not only that, but he had photos in his tree that looked exactly like my grandfather when he was younger. I called my dad over to look at the computer. He took one look at the screen and his face went white. He sat down hard in the kitchen chair and just stared. My grandfather kept saying there had to be some mistake, that he never had any kids, that he would have known. That's when my dad spoke up. He said he remembered his mother mentioning something years ago about his father having a brief relationship before they got married. She said it was right after he came back from the Navy and that the girl moved away. My grandmother apparently made my dad promise never to bring it up because it was ancient history. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about Thomas Henderson. It wasn't hard since he had a pretty detailed family tree online. According to his information, his mother was named Carol and she dated my grandfather in 1972. Carol apparently never told my grandfather she was pregnant and moved to another state. Thomas grew up thinking his father had died in Vietnam. The timeline made perfect sense. My grandfather came back from his Navy service in late 1971. He met my grandmother in 1973 and they got married 6 months later. My dad was born in 1975. That would put Thomas's birth right in the middle of 1972. I showed all this information to my family. My grandfather looked like someone had punched him in the gut. He kept saying he had no idea, that Carol never told him anything. My dad just sat there processing everything. My mom started making phone calls to figure out how to contact Thomas. Thomas lived about 4 hours away in another state. My mom found his phone number through one of those people search websites. She called him that same evening. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was clear that Thomas was just as shocked as we were. He had grown up believing his father was dead. My mom arranged for Thomas to drive down the following weekend to meet everyone. Those 5 days of waiting were the longest of my life. My grandfather barely ate anything and spent most of his time sitting on the back porch smoking cigarettes. My dad threw himself into work and came home exhausted every night. The whole house felt tense. Thomas arrived on Saturday morning with his wife Linda, 49F, and their 2 kids Emma, 16F, and Ryan, 14M. I watched my grandfather meet his son for the first time through the front window. They stood in our driveway just looking at each other for probably 2 minutes before anyone said anything. The resemblance was unmistakable. Thomas had the same nose as my grandfather, the same way of standing with his hands in his pockets. Even their voices sounded similar. Thomas brought old photos of his mother and some letters she had written about my grandfather before Thomas was born. We spent the whole day talking and trying to piece together what had happened. Carol had apparently been in love with my grandfather but knew he wasn't ready to settle down. When she found out she was pregnant, she decided not to tell him because she didn't want to trap him. She moved back to her hometown and raised Thomas as a single mother until she married someone else when Thomas was 5. Carol had died 10 years ago from cancer. Thomas said she had mentioned my grandfather's name a few times over the years but always said he was probably dead by now. She never encouraged Thomas to look for him. The strangest part was that Thomas had been living only 4 hours away this whole time. He worked as an electrician and had 3 grandchildren. He had been married to Linda for 28 years. In some ways, he had the same kind of life my grandfather had built with our family. My dad took the news better than I expected. He seemed almost excited to have a half-brother. They discovered they both work in construction and have similar interests. By the end of the day, my dad was showing Thomas around his workshop and they were planning to meet up again soon. But my grandfather struggled with everything. He kept saying he missed 51 years of his son's life. Thomas told him it wasn't his fault since he never knew, but my grandfather couldn't get past it. He said he had always wanted more children but my grandmother had complications after my dad was born and they couldn't have any more. Thomas and his family stayed until Sunday evening. Before they left, Thomas asked my grandfather if he would like to meet his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. My grandfather said yes, but I could tell he was overwhelmed by the whole situation. After they left, my grandfather went to his room and didn't come out for the rest of the night. My parents had a long conversation in the kitchen about how to handle everything. My dad seemed positive about building a relationship with Thomas, but my mom was worried about my grandfather's reaction. The next morning my grandfather was gone. He left a note saying he needed time to think and that he was going to stay with his old Navy buddy Frank about an hour away. He took his truck and some clothes but left everything else behind. That was 2 weeks ago. My dad has been calling him every day, but my grandfather won't answer his phone. Frank finally called back yesterday and said my grandfather is staying with him but doesn't want to talk to anyone from our family right now. He said my grandfather feels guilty about missing Thomas's entire life and doesn't know how to face any of us. My dad drove over to Frank's house on Tuesday, but my grandfather wouldn't come to the door. Frank said he spends most of his time sitting in the garage working on an old boat motor and doesn't want to discuss the situation. Meanwhile, Thomas has been calling and texting regularly. He wants to maintain contact with our family and has invited us to visit him and meet his extended family. My dad wants to go but feels like he's betraying my grandfather somehow. My mom thinks we should wait until my grandfather comes home to figure out next steps. I don't know what to do. I started this whole thing just trying to get extra credit in a genetics class. Now my grandfather has basically disappeared and my dad is caught between his father and his newly discovered half-brother. Thomas seems like a good person and I think I would like having him as part of our family, but not if it means losing my grandfather. The house feels empty without my grandfather here. My dad still goes out to the garage every evening, but he just stands there looking at the tools they used to work on together. My mom has been cooking smaller portions because she keeps forgetting my grandfather isn't coming to dinner. I keep wondering if I should have just taken the regular assignment instead of doing the DNA test. But then I think about Thomas growing up without knowing his father and how happy he seemed to finally meet my grandfather. I don't know if I made things better or worse for everyone involved. Update 1 I posted here about 6 weeks ago after a DNA test revealed my grandfather had a son he never knew about. A lot of people asked for updates, so here's what has happened since then. My grandfather came home 3 weeks after he left. He showed up on a Tuesday morning while my dad was at work and my mom was running errands. I was the only one home since I was between classes. He walked in through the back door like nothing had happened and started making coffee in the kitchen. I asked him where he had been and if he was okay. He said he had been thinking and that he was ready to talk to Thomas. He seemed different though. Quieter than usual, and he kept looking around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. When my parents got home that evening, my grandfather told us he wanted to drive up to meet Thomas's family properly. He said he had been wrong to run away and that he owed it to Thomas to try to build some kind of relationship. My dad was relieved and started making plans for a weekend trip. We drove up to Thomas's house the following Saturday. Thomas lived in a small town about 4 hours north of us. His house was similar to ours, a 2-story colonial with a big front yard. When we pulled into the driveway, Thomas came out to meet us with his wife Linda and their 2 kids. My grandfather walked up to Thomas and they shook hands for a long time. Thomas introduced his children and Linda made sure everyone felt welcome. Emma was a junior in high school and played softball. Ryan was a freshman and was really into video games. They seemed like normal teenagers. We spent the day looking through photo albums and talking about Thomas's childhood. Carol had kept some pictures of my grandfather from when they were dating. There was one photo of him in his Navy uniform that looked exactly like pictures we had of him from the same time period. Thomas showed us around his workshop in the basement. He had the same kind of setup as my grandfather with woodworking tools and half-finished projects everywhere. They started talking about a cabinet Thomas was building and my grandfather offered to help him with the joinery work. The visit went well, but I noticed my grandfather was still holding back. He was polite and interested but not the same warm person he usually was with family. Thomas seemed to pick up on it too because he kept trying to draw my grandfather into conversations. Linda made dinner for everyone and we ate in their dining room. She had set the table with her good dishes and made my grandfather's favorite pot roast after my mom had mentioned it to her on the phone. During dinner, Thomas talked about his job and his kids' activities. Normal family conversation, but I could tell my grandfather was struggling to connect. After dinner, Thomas asked my grandfather if he would like to see some home videos of Emma and Ryan when they were little. My grandfather said yes, so we all gathered in the living room to watch. Thomas showed videos of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and family vacations. That's when my grandfather started crying. Not sobbing or making noise, just tears running down his face while he watched Thomas's children grow up on the television screen. Thomas noticed and turned off the video. He told my grandfather that none of this was his fault and that he had turned out fine without knowing his father. My grandfather said that wasn't the point. He said he had missed everything important in Thomas's life and now he was watching his grandchildren's childhoods on video instead of being there for them. Thomas tried to tell him they could make new memories starting now, but my grandfather just shook his head. We stayed until late that evening. Before we left, Thomas's daughter Emma gave my grandfather a drawing she had made of their family tree with his name at the top. My grandfather thanked her and folded it carefully to put in his wallet. The drive home was quiet. My grandfather sat in the passenger seat looking out the window while my dad drove. When we got home, my grandfather went straight to his room and didn't come out until the next afternoon. The next few weeks were strange. My grandfather was physically present but emotionally distant. He stopped working on projects in the garage and spent most of his time watching television or reading. He still came to Sunday dinners but barely participated in conversations. Thomas called every few days to check in and invited us to visit again. My dad wanted to go but my grandfather always had an excuse. He said he was tired or had other plans, even though he clearly didn't have any plans. Then 3 weeks ago, something happened that changed everything. Thomas called on a Wednesday evening to tell us that Linda had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She had found a lump during a routine exam and the biopsy came back positive. They were scheduled to start chemotherapy the following month. My grandfather's whole demeanor changed when he heard the news. He asked to speak to Thomas directly and spent over an hour on the phone with him. After he hung up, my grandfather announced that he was driving up to help Thomas with whatever they needed. My dad offered to go with him but my grandfather said this was something he needed to do alone. He packed a bag and left the next morning. He told us he would call when he got there safely but otherwise didn't know when he would be back. That was 3 weeks ago. My grandfather has been staying with Thomas and Linda ever since. He calls us every few days to check in and give updates on Linda's treatment. According to my dad's conversations with him, my grandfather has been helping around their house and driving Linda to medical appointments when Thomas has to work. Thomas called my dad last weekend to tell him how grateful they were for my grandfather's help. He said my grandfather had fixed their back steps, cleaned out their gutters, and was teaching Ryan how to use woodworking tools. He also said my grandfather seemed more relaxed than he had during our previous visits. My dad wants to drive up to see how everyone is doing but my grandfather asked us to wait a few more weeks. He said Linda was having a rough time with the chemotherapy and that too many visitors might be overwhelming. I understand why my grandfather felt like he needed to help, but the house feels empty without him again. My dad has been working longer hours and comes home exhausted every night. My mom keeps setting 4 places at dinner out of habit and then having to put 1 plate away. The strangest part is that my grandfather seems happier living with Thomas than he ever was after discovering he had a son. When he calls, his voice sounds more like his old self. He talks about projects he's working on and things he's teaching Ryan. It's like he found a way to be a father and grandfather by jumping in during a crisis. My dad is trying to be supportive but I can tell he's hurt that my grandfather chose to be with Thomas instead of coming home. My mom thinks my grandfather is overcompensating for the years he missed, but my dad says that doesn't make his absence any easier to handle. I keep wondering if my grandfather is planning to move in with Thomas permanently. Nobody has said anything directly, but the way he talks about their daily routines makes it sound like he's settling in for the long term. Part of me thinks that might be what's best for him, but another part of me wants my family back the way it was before I decided to take that stupid DNA test. Update 2. It's been 4 months since my last update and everything has gotten much more complicated. Linda finished her chemotherapy treatments and is doing well, but my grandfather never came home. He's been living with Thomas permanently and seems to have no plans to move back in with us. The transition happened gradually. At first, my grandfather was just staying to help during Linda's treatment. But as weeks turned into months, he started talking about Thomas's house as home. He had his mail forwarded there and moved more of his belongings up from our house. My dad drove up to visit about 2 months ago. He said my grandfather had set up a workshop in Thomas's garage and was in the middle of helping Ryan build a treehouse in their backyard. My grandfather showed my dad around like a proud homeowner and introduced him to neighbors as Thomas's father. The visit was awkward according to my dad. My grandfather was friendly but distant, like my dad was a visitor instead of his son. When my dad asked when he was planning to come home, my grandfather said he was needed where he was and that my dad was old enough to take care of himself. That conversation created a rift between my dad and my grandfather that has only gotten worse. My dad started calling less frequently and my grandfather seemed fine with a reduced contact. When they do talk, the conversations are polite but strained. 3 weeks ago, my dad found out that my grandfather had signed over his social security checks to be deposited directly into a joint account with Thomas. My grandfather said it was to help with household expenses since he was living there full time. My dad was furious and accused my grandfather of choosing his new family over his old one. They had a big argument over the phone. My dad said my grandfather was abandoning the family that had always been there for him. My grandfather said my dad was being selfish and that he finally had a chance to be a real father to someone who needed him. The call ended with my dad hanging up and my grandfather hasn't called back since. The situation got worse last month when Thomas invited our family to Emma's high school graduation. My dad wanted to go to support his half-brother, but my mom was worried about how tense things had become. I decided to go anyway because I thought it was important. The graduation was held at the local high school gymnasium. Thomas had saved seats for us in the section with Linda's family. When we arrived, my grandfather was sitting with them like he belonged there. He greeted us politely but spent most of the ceremony talking to Thomas's in-laws and other relatives. After the ceremony, there was a party at Thomas's house. My grandfather had helped organize everything and acted as host alongside Thomas and Linda. He introduced people to Emma as her grandfather and talked about how proud he was of her accomplishments. Watching my grandfather interact with Thomas's extended family was difficult. He was more animated and engaged than I had seen him in months. He told stories about Emma and Ryan like he had been part of their lives forever. Meanwhile, my dad stood off to the side looking like an outsider at his own brother's family gathering. The breaking point came during Emma's speech thanking everyone for coming. She specifically mentioned how grateful she was that her grandfather had been there to support her family during her mother's illness and throughout her senior year. My grandfather had tears in his eyes and Thomas put his arm around him. My dad left the party early. He told Thomas congratulations and shook my grandfather's hand goodbye like they were acquaintances. On the drive home, my dad didn't say much, but I could tell he was done trying to maintain a relationship with my grandfather. Since then, my dad has stopped calling my grandfather entirely. My mom still talks to him occasionally but keeps the conversations brief and focused on practical matters. My grandfather hasn't asked why my dad stopped calling and doesn't seem particularly concerned about it. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from my grandfather asking if I wanted to visit for a weekend. He said Thomas was planning to teach Ryan and me how to rebuild an engine and thought it would be a good opportunity for us to spend time together. I said I would think about it but haven't given him an answer yet. Part of me wants to maintain a relationship with my grandfather, but another part of me feels disloyal to my dad. My grandfather essentially abandoned our family to play house with people he barely knew 6 months ago. The fact that they're related doesn't change the fact that he chose them over us. My dad has been struggling since my grandfather left. He still goes out to the garage every evening but mostly just sits there looking at the tools they used to work on together. He's been picking up extra work projects to stay busy and comes home exhausted most nights. My mom is caught in the middle and trying to keep peace with everyone. She thinks my dad should try to work things out with my grandfather, but my dad says there's nothing left to work out. My grandfather made his choice and my dad is moving on. The hardest part is that my grandfather seems genuinely happy with his new life. When I talk to him on the phone, he sounds more content than he has in years. He's found a purpose helping Thomas's family and being the father and grandfather he always wanted to be. I can't blame him for wanting that, but I also can't forgive him for walking away from the family that raised him. Thomas has tried to bridge the gap between my dad and my grandfather. He calls my dad regularly and has invited our family to visit any time. But Thomas doesn't understand the history between my dad and my grandfather, or how much my dad sacrificed to take care of him after my grandmother died. I keep wondering if I should accept my grandfather's invitation to visit. Maybe spending time with him would help me understand his decision better. But I also don't want to betray my dad by maintaining a relationship that my dad can't have. The whole situation has made me realize how fragile family relationships really are. 6 months ago, we were a close family who did everything together. Now we're divided between people who barely speak to each other, all because of a DNA test that was supposed to be about extra credit for a college class. Update 3. This will be my final update since I think I've reached the end of this whole situation. It's been 8 months since my last post and a lot has changed, mostly for the worse. My grandfather has been living with Thomas for over a year now and has made it clear he considers that his permanent home. He sold his truck 3 months ago and bought a newer one with Thomas's name as co-owner. Last month, he changed his emergency contacts at the hospital and with his doctor to list Thomas instead of my dad. My dad found out about the emergency contact change when the hospital called Thomas instead of him after my grandfather had a minor heart episode in September. My dad only learned about it 2 days later when Thomas called to let him know what had happened. My dad drove up to the hospital immediately but my grandfather was already discharged and back at Thomas's house. That hospital incident was the last time my dad tried to maintain any contact with my grandfather. When he called to check on his recovery, my grandfather was polite but treated him like a distant relative instead of his son. My dad finally accepted that their relationship was over. The breaking point for me came 2 months ago when my grandfather called to invite me to Ryan's birthday party. He said the whole family would be there and that he wanted me to meet more of Thomas's relatives. When I asked if my dad was invited, my grandfather said it would probably be better if just I came since things were complicated between him and my dad. I told my grandfather I wouldn't come to family events that excluded my dad. My grandfather said he understood but seemed disappointed. That was the last conversation we had. He hasn't called since and I haven't reached out to him either. Thomas continued trying to include our side of the family for a while longer. He called my dad regularly and sent Christmas cards. But my dad made it clear he wasn't interested in maintaining a relationship that didn't include his father, so Thomas eventually stopped calling too. The strangest part is how completely my grandfather has integrated into Thomas's family. I follow Emma on social media and regularly see photos of family gatherings with my grandfather prominently featured. He's in pictures at Easter dinner, Ryan's baseball games, and Linda's birthday party. In every photo, he looks happy and comfortable like he's been part of their family forever. Linda posted a photo last month of my grandfather teaching Ryan's girlfriend how to use a sewing machine that belonged to her grandmother. The caption talked about how wonderful it was to have such a caring grandfather figure in their lives. Reading that felt like a punch to the stomach because my grandfather never showed that kind of interest in my girlfriend when I brought her to family dinners. My dad has moved on as much as anyone can from losing a parent who is still alive. He converted my grandfather's room into a home office and stored most of his belongings in the garage. He's been working more and has taken up fishing as a hobby since he doesn't have anyone to work on projects with anymore. My mom still struggles with the whole situation. She occasionally mentions missing my grandfather at dinner or wonders what he's doing for the holidays. But she's been supportive of my dad's decision to move forward without trying to repair the relationship. The holidays were particularly difficult. My grandfather sent us a Christmas card with a photo of him with Thomas's entire extended family. He was in the center of the picture holding one of Thomas's grandchildren. My dad threw the card away without comment, but I saw him looking at it for a long time before he did. I've had to accept that my grandfather prioritized being a father to Thomas over being a grandfather to me. Maybe it's because Thomas needed him more, or maybe it's because starting fresh was easier than dealing with the complicated emotions of his existing relationships. Either way, he made his choice and has shown no regret about it. The hardest part is that I understand why my grandfather did what he did. Thomas gave him an opportunity to be the father he felt he had failed to be. With Thomas's family, my grandfather could start over without the weight of past mistakes or complicated history. He could be the person he always wanted to be instead of dealing with who he actually was. But understanding his motivation doesn't make his abandonment hurt any less. My dad gave up years of his life taking care of my grandfather after my grandmother died. Our family welcomed him into our home and made him a central part of our lives. The fact that he walked away from all of that to play father to someone he barely knew still makes me angry. I've stopped following Emma on social media because seeing my grandfather happy with his new family became too painful. I don't want updates about his life or to see him at events that I'm not invited to. It's easier to pretend he doesn't exist than to be constantly reminded that he chose other people over us. My dad recently told me he's proud of how I handled the whole situation. He said it would have been easy for me to maintain a relationship with my grandfather by excluding him, but that I chose loyalty to our family instead. That meant a lot to me because I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice. Thomas sent me a friend request on social media a few weeks ago, but I didn't accept it. I don't blame him for what happened, but I also don't want a relationship with him that comes at the expense of my dad. Maybe that's unfair to Thomas, but family loyalty means making hard choices sometimes. Looking back, I wish I had never taken that DNA test. The extra credit wasn't worth destroying my family and losing my grandfather. Sometimes information that seems harmless can change everything in ways you never expect. If I could go back and just write a regular research paper instead, I would do it without hesitation. My grandfather gets to be the father and grandfather he always wanted to be, but it came at the cost of the family that actually needed him. Thomas's family gained a wonderful addition, but my family lost someone who was supposed to be there for us. I guess that's just how life works sometimes. Not everyone gets what they deserve, and family doesn't always mean what you think it means. The house is quieter now, but we've adjusted to my grandfather's absence. My dad and I have started working on projects together, and my mom has taken up gardening to fill the time she used to spend talking with my grandfather. We're different than we were before, but we're still a family. Just a smaller one than we used to be. My current wife knew about my rental property with my ex before we married and said nothing, but once it started making real money she wanted me to sell it, and when I legally secured it for my son without telling her first, she said I was hiding things from her. I bought a 2-bedroom house in Millerton back in 2009. I was 28 at the time, working as a site supervisor at a construction company, and I had managed to save up enough for a down payment. The house was nothing special, a corner lot on a quiet street, older neighborhood, smaller rooms. I took out a 15-year mortgage on it. At the time I bought it, I was not married. It was just a property I picked up because the price was right and I figured it was better than leaving money in a savings account. 2 years later, I married my ex-wife, Donna, 38F. She was an event planner, practical, detail-oriented, and very good at keeping things organized. When we got married, I added her name to the deed. No specific reason other than it felt like the right thing to do at the time. We were together for 5 years before we separated. There was no dramatic falling out. We had just grown into very different people with very different ideas of what we wanted. The divorce was as straightforward as a divorce can be. Donna and I sat down with a mediator, split what needed to be split, and walked away without much argument. The Millerton house came up during the settlement. Neither of us wanted to sell it at that point. The mortgage was manageable, and we had a tenant who had been in there for 2 years already. We agreed to keep renting it out, let the rent cover the mortgage and basic maintenance, and deal with it later. Donna took on the management side of things. She handled the tenant calls, the maintenance requests, the lease renewals. I provided the initial capital when we first bought it and continued to handle anything that needed a larger expense. We went about 75 months, just over 6 years, where the house basically broke even. Whatever came in went right back out to the mortgage, insurance, and repairs. I did not see a single dollar of profit from it during that period, and neither did Donna, really. It just existed. We also have a son, Wilson, 12M, from the marriage. He lives primarily with Donna, and I see him every other week and on school breaks. The house never came up between us as a problem during those years. It was just something we both knew was there. The mortgage finished in early 2022. After 15 years, the house was paid off. At that point, the rent we charged, $1,450 a month, became actual income. Donna and I worked out a 55-45 split. She gets 55% because she manages the property, and I get 45% because I provided the original down payment and handle larger financial decisions. It comes out to about $650 a month for me, after we set aside a portion for repairs and vacancies. I met my current wife, Camille, 37F, in 2021. She is a pediatric nurse. She had been married before too and has 2 kids from that marriage, Owen, 9M, and Lily, 7F. Her ex-husband, from what she has described, was not financially responsible, often left her short on bills, and was unreliable in a way that created a lot of stress for her over several years. She and I got married in late 2022. We bought a house together, a 4-bedroom in a newer subdivision about 30 minutes from Millerton. The mortgage on that house is in both our names, and we split it evenly. We both earn similar salaries, and going into the marriage, we were transparent about our finances. I disclosed the Millerton house before we got married. Camille knew about it, knew about Donna, and knew that Wilson stood to benefit from it eventually. She did not raise any objections at that point. Things started to shift around mid-2023, about 8 months into our marriage. Camille began bringing up the Millerton house more frequently. At first it was small comments, that it was a little strange to still share property with an ex, that she felt odd about it. I did not dismiss her. I explained again how it worked, how Donna and I had a purely business-like arrangement, how we rarely spoke beyond property matters. Camille seemed to hear it, but the subject kept coming back. By early 2024, the conversation had changed. Camille was no longer raising it as a vague discomfort. She was asking me to sell it. Her argument was that the sale proceeds could go toward paying down our joint mortgage faster, or toward our shared savings, and that co-owning property with a former spouse was putting unnecessary strain on our marriage. She also brought up that she wanted us to try for a baby, and that having this financial arrangement with Donna in the background felt unsettling to her. I want to be fair about her position. Camille went through a lot financially with her first marriage. Owen and Lily both saw their family struggle, and she has worked very hard to give them stability. I understand that her radar for financial risk and complicated arrangements is probably more sensitive than most people's. But here is the thing. Donna and I had always talked about what would happen to the Millerton house in the long run. The understanding between us, not legally formalized at that point, but a consistent agreement since the divorce, was that the house would go to Wilson when he turned 25 or when he got married, whichever came first. It was never meant to be a house we held forever. It was something we were building up for him. When I explained this to Camille, her response was not what I expected. She pointed out that Owen and Lily did not have anything like that, no property, no asset being held for them specifically. She felt it was unfair that Wilson had something that her kids did not. She also brought up that if we had a child together, that child would be left out too. I told her that all 3 kids, Owen, Lily, and Wilson, had college savings accounts I contributed to. Wilson had one through Donna and me, and I had opened separate ones for Owen and Lily after Camille and I got married. The Millerton house was separate. It was built from money I saved before I even met Camille, and from Donna's years of work managing it. It felt like a different bucket entirely. Camille did not see it that way. She proposed that we sell the house, divide the sale proceeds equally among all the kids plus into our joint retirement, and be done with it. I told her that selling the house would mean giving up $650 a month in reliable income indefinitely, in exchange for a one-time amount that would be split and largely spent. It did not make financial sense to me, and it also meant going back on what Wilson had been told his whole life. That conversation did not end well. Camille went quiet for most of the next week. She told me she felt like she was not a priority, that I was holding on to my previous life at the expense of our current one. That is where we are. Am I the asshole here? Update 1: A lot happened in the 6 weeks since I posted, and I'm going to try to write it out without making it longer than it needs to be. About 2 weeks after my original post, I had a conversation with Donna about the situation. I did not call her to complain about Camille. I called her because I wanted to talk through the legal side of the Wilson arrangement. Several people in the comments had pointed out that our verbal agreement about leaving the house to him had no legal weight, and that if either of us died or changed our minds, there was nothing binding. Donna agreed. She had been thinking the same thing. We decided to speak to an attorney about our options. The attorney we consulted explained that one of the most practical approaches was to begin gifting equity in the house to Wilson in annual increments that stayed below the federal gift tax threshold. This way, Wilson would gradually become a part owner of the house over several years. By the time he was in his mid-20s, a substantial portion, potentially the whole thing, could be in his name without triggering major tax events. We started the process. A new deed was drawn up naming Wilson as a partial owner, with a small initial percentage. The paperwork was filed. I did not tell Camille about this right away. That was a mistake, and I will own it. She found out about 3 weeks after the deed was filed. One of her close friends works at the county recorder's office. I do not know exactly how that conversation came up, but Camille came home one evening and asked me directly whether I had changed the deed on the Millerton house. I told her yes and explained what we had done and why. The rest of that evening was difficult. Camille said she felt completely cut out of a decision that affected our family's financial picture. She said that I had taken a step that would permanently prevent the house from ever being sold without Wilson's agreement, and that I had done it without telling her. She was right about the facts of it. Wilson becoming a part owner did mean that neither Donna nor I could force a sale on our own anymore. That was partly the point. What I had not anticipated was how Camille would interpret the timing. She believed, and she said this directly, that I had done it specifically to block her from ever getting what she wanted. She did not think it was about protecting Wilson. She thought it was about making sure she had no leverage. I tried to explain that the conversation with Donna had started because of the comments on my Reddit post, not because of anything Camille had said or done. I showed her the thread. I pointed out the specific comment that flagged the lack of a legal structure. She read through it and did not say much. Over the following week, she brought up a few other things that had been sitting with her. One of them surprised me. She told me that before we got married, she had asked her mother for advice about the Millerton situation. Her mother had apparently told her that it would not be a long-term issue, that I would probably sell it within a year or two of us marrying once I was settled into the new relationship. Camille had believed that. She had gone into the marriage expecting the house situation to resolve itself naturally, not expecting it to become more entrenched. That explained a lot. She had not objected before the wedding because she thought it was temporary. When it became clear it was not, she started pushing back. I wished she had told me that earlier, because it would have changed how I approached several of those earlier conversations. I also found out during this period that Camille had spoken to her sister about the situation at some point in the previous year. Her sister, Renata, 42F, had apparently told Camille that I was clearly not fully committed to the new family and that the house was proof. Renata had been the loudest voice encouraging Camille to push for a sale. I had met Renata maybe 4 times. She did not know the details of what Donna and I had agreed to or why. I did not confront Renata about any of this. It was not something I thought would help. But it did make me understand that Camille had been processing this with people who only had one side of the story, and that the version they heard was probably not particularly charitable to me. After the conversation about the deed, Camille and I went about 2 weeks of very minimal discussion at home. She was not openly hostile, but the regular rhythm of the house, cooking together in the evenings, sitting in the same room in the mornings, shifted. She started going to bed earlier. She stopped bringing up the baby conversation, which she had mentioned regularly for months. Owen and Lily did not seem to notice anything specific. They are young enough that as long as routines hold, they are generally fine. Wilson came for his scheduled week during this period and spent most of his time with Owen playing video games. Nothing unusual. I also did something during this period that I did not discuss with Camille before doing it. I took my monthly rental income, the 45% share, and divided it. I set up recurring transfers, 1/3 into Owen's college account, 1/3 into Lily's, and 1/3 into Wilson's, which already had its own contributions going in. My own portion of the rental income essentially stopped coming to me directly. I have documentation of this if it ever becomes relevant. I told Camille about it about a week after I set it up. I explained what I had done and why. She did not respond the way I thought she would. She said it felt like I was trying to buy her agreement, not that I was genuinely trying to be fair. She said the real issue was not about the money going to Owen and Lily. It was about the fact that she had no say in decisions involving an asset that she felt was connected to our household. I did not have a good answer for that. The house predates our marriage by over a decade. But I understood what she meant. Update 2. I am going to try to keep this one focused because there is a specific thing that happened that I think is worth writing down. About 6 weeks after my last update, Camille and her sister Renata had a falling out that had nothing to do with me or the house. It had to do with a separate family matter involving their mother's finances. I will not get into the details because it is not my story to tell. But the result was that Camille and Renata were not speaking for several weeks. During that period, Camille's position on the Millerton house visibly softened. She was not suddenly fine with everything, but the urgency dropped. She stopped bringing it up in the way she had been. She focused on work and the kids' school schedules and a home renovation project she had been planning for the back patio. Then something happened that I had not seen coming. Donna called me on a Thursday evening and told me that the tenant in the Millerton house, a woman named Carol who had been there for 4 years, had given notice. She was moving out of state to be closer to her adult daughter. She was giving us 60 days. Donna and I talked through what to do. Finding a new tenant at a good rent in Millerton was not going to be difficult. The neighborhood had improved considerably in the 15 years we had owned the property, and comparable rentals were going for nearly $1,900 a month. But the vacancy period and the updates the house needed before a new tenant moved in were going to cost something. I told Camille about the vacancy the same night. Her first question was whether this meant we would sell. I told her Donna and I were planning to re-rent it. She did not argue, but she asked if we could at least have the house appraised so she knew what we were working with financially. I agreed to that. It seemed like a reasonable request. The appraisal came back at $310,000. I passed that number to Camille. She spent a couple of days quiet and then told me she had run some numbers on what our joint financial situation would look like if we sold and put the cash toward our current mortgage. She had written it out on a notepad, monthly payment changes, timeline to full ownership of our current home, what the difference looked like over 10 years. She showed it to me and asked me to look at it seriously. I did look at it. The numbers were not wrong. Selling would accelerate paying off our home significantly. I also ran my own numbers afterward, showing what 15 years of rental income at the new rate would amount to versus the one-time cash. The income projection over that period was larger, but it was spread out and less immediately visible. We had what I would describe as the most functional conversation about the house we had ever had. It did not end in agreement. I was not going to reverse the deed change or push Donna to sell when we had just formalized Wilson's stake in it. But we both left that conversation without anyone storming out. I told her that when the house eventually goes to Wilson, and if he decides to sell it at that point, the outcome would still be a positive one for him. I was not holding on to this property to spite her. The house was a plan that started before I knew her, and it was going to finish the way it was intended to. She told me she heard that, but she still thought I had handled the deed change poorly by not telling her first. I told her she was right about that part, and I meant it. The new tenant moved in about 7 weeks after Carol left. Donna found a couple, a teacher and an EMT, who signed a 14-month lease at $1,875. The house is rented again. Update 3: Camille and I sat down about a month ago and had a direct conversation about where things stood between us. Not about the house specifically. About everything. She said that the house itself had become less of the issue and more of a symbol of something she had been carrying since before we married, a feeling that she was joining a life that already had all its major decisions made, and that her input only mattered for things that were small enough to not have any history attached to them. She was not blaming me for decisions I made before I knew her. But she was telling me that the way those things got handled once we were married made her feel like an afterthought. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her to tell me what she needed from me going forward. Not about the house. In general. She gave me a few specific things. She wanted to be told about any financial decisions that touched on the Millerton property before they happened, not necessarily to have veto power, but to not find out from someone else. She wanted Owen and Lily's college contributions to be formalized in writing so that if anything ever changed between us, it was documented. She also said she wanted us to revisit the baby conversation when we were in a steadier place, because she still wanted that, and she had not brought it up in months because it felt like the wrong time. I agreed to all three of those things without condition. We also agreed that I would loop her in on any communications with Donna related to the Millerton house that involved financial decisions. Not every maintenance call, but anything that changed the structure of what we had. She said that was enough. I also took a practical step that came out of something an attorney friend mentioned in passing. Since Wilson is now a partial owner of the Millerton property, any future transfer of additional equity should ideally be documented clearly enough that there is no ambiguity if something happens to me or Donna. I had a short addendum drawn up that outlined the gifting schedule for the remaining equity, and the expectation that the house would pass to Wilson outright by a specific age. Donna signed it. I kept a copy at home and told Camille it was there and what it said. She read through it and put it back without comment, which was fine. At least she knew. The tension in the house went down after that. Not entirely, there are still moments, but the weight of the unspoken lifted somewhat. Renata and Camille eventually spoke again. I do not know what was said in that conversation. Camille did not volunteer details and I did not ask. What I noticed was that Camille stopped referencing what Renata thought about things. Whether they fully repaired things between them is between the two of them. I had a conversation with Donna around the same time. It was a short one. She asked how things were at home and I gave her an honest answer, that it had been a difficult stretch but things were steadier now. She said she was glad. That was the extent of it. Donna and I have always kept things practical between us, and neither of us had any reason to change that now. Wilson came for his school break recently. He turned 13 last month. He spent most of his time with Owen and Lily, and one afternoon asked me if he could learn how to cook something. We made pasta from scratch together and it took about twice as long as it should have because neither of us knew what we were doing. Camille helped for part of it and laughed at us when the dough came out wrong the first time. We ate it anyway. Wilson asked if we could do it again next time he visited. Owen has started asking questions about the house in Millerton. He is 9 and somehow found out through Wilson that there was a rental property. He asked me one morning whether it was like a hotel. I explained what a rental property was in simple terms and he accepted that and moved on. Kids at that age want facts, not context. The Millerton house is rented. The deed reflects Wilson as a partial owner. Donna manages it and we talk when we need to. Camille and I are still together, still working through things that are not simple. I did not get everything right. The deed change should have been discussed with her before I filed it, and I knew that even at the time. Some of this could have been avoided. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. Partner refused to skip his daily 4-hour gym sessions to help with our 2-month-old baby even when I had 101 fever. Then his brother told me I'm not cut out for motherhood because military wives handle deployments alone. My partner David, 29M, and I, 28F, have been together for 3 years and we just had our first baby, Millie, 2 months old. David works as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant. It's a decent job with normal hours, usually 8 to 5 on weekdays. Before Millie was born, David was really into fitness. He would go to the gym about 5 to 6 times a week for maybe an hour or two. I never had a problem with this because everyone needs their hobbies and he was home most evenings. The pregnancy was rough. I had severe morning sickness until week 20, then developed gestational diabetes. David was supportive during this time, coming to most doctor appointments and helping around the house when I couldn't keep food down. I thought we were a good team. Millie arrived 2 weeks early and it's been chaos since. She has colic and reflux, which means she cries for hours every day, usually from 6 p.m. to midnight. The pediatrician says this is normal and should resolve by 3 to 4 months, but right now it's exhausting. She also refuses bottles completely. We've tried every brand, every nipple type, different temperatures, having David feed her instead of me, nothing works. This means I'm the only one who can feed her, which happens every 2 to 3 hours around the clock. Here's where the problem started. About 3 weeks after Millie was born, David announced he was going back to his gym routine because he needed to maintain his mental health. I understood this at first. New parenthood is stressful for everyone. But his gym routine has completely changed. He now leaves work at 5 p.m. and goes straight to the gym. He doesn't come home until 9 or 10 p.m. most nights. When I asked him about it, he explained that he's doing a new workout program that requires longer sessions. He does weight training for about 90 minutes, then cardio for another hour, then he sits in the sauna for 45 minutes to an hour. After that, he often runs into gym buddies and they'll grab protein shakes and talk for another 30 to 45 minutes. This means I'm handling Millie's worst crying period completely alone every single day. Those evening hours from 6 to 10 p.m. are brutal. She screams no matter what I do. I've tried swaddling, white noise, car rides, bouncing on an exercise ball, warm baths, everything. Sometimes I have to put her in her crib and step outside for 5 minutes just to catch my breath because the crying is so overwhelming. By the time David gets home, Millie has usually exhausted herself and fallen asleep. He'll peek in at her, tell me she looks peaceful, and then make himself dinner. He often comments on how quiet the house is and how he's glad he missed the difficult part of the evening. I tried talking to him about this several times. I explained that I need help during those evening hours, or at least some relief afterwards so I can shower or eat a proper meal. I suggested he could go to the gym in the morning before work, or maybe skip some days and go every other day instead. I even offered to research gyms closer to his work so he could work out during lunch breaks. Each time I brought this up, he would say he understood but then nothing would change. He'd tell me that his current routine is really working for him and he's seeing great results. He'd promised to try to come home earlier but it never happened. He started saying that morning workouts don't work for him because he's not alert enough, and that skipping days would ruin his progress. The breaking point came last Tuesday. I had been up since 4 a.m. because Millie was cluster feeding. She barely napped during the day and I couldn't put her down for more than 10 minutes without her crying. I hadn't showered in 3 days and had eaten nothing but granola bars and crackers because I couldn't use both hands to prepare anything else. At 6 p.m., Millie started her usual evening crying session. I texted David asking if he could please come home early just this once because I was at my limit. He replied that he was already at the gym and had plans to meet his workout partner Jake for their leg day routine. He said he'd be home by his usual time. I spent the next 4 hours walking around the house with Millie, trying everything I could think of. My back was killing me from all the bouncing and swaying. At one point I sat on the kitchen floor and cried along with her because I didn't know what else to do. David came home at 9:45 p.m. Millie had finally fallen asleep about 20 minutes earlier. He walked in, saw me on the couch with her sleeping on my chest, and asked if I wanted him to make me a sandwich. When I didn't respond right away, he shrugged and went to take a shower. That's when David's older brother Ryan, 31M, texted me. Ryan has been staying with us for the past 2 months while he looks for his own place after his divorce. He works night shifts at a warehouse, so he's usually sleeping during the day and leaves for work around 10 p.m. Ryan asked if everything was okay because he could hear Millie crying through his bedroom door and noticed I seemed stressed lately. I was so tired that I ended up telling him everything, about David's gym schedule, about feeling overwhelmed, about not getting any help during the hardest parts of the day. His response shocked me. He said I needed to stop being so selfish and think about what David needs. He pointed out that David works hard all day and deserves time to decompress. He said that taking care of babies is what women are naturally good at, and that I should be grateful David is staying in shape instead of letting himself go like a lot of new fathers do. Then he really got going. He told me that my constant complaining was creating a negative atmosphere in the house. He said David probably stays at the gym longer just to avoid coming home to my nagging. He suggested that if I really needed help, I should ask my mother or hire a babysitter instead of expecting David to give up his self-care routine. The conversation ended with Ryan telling me that some women handle multiple kids while working full-time jobs, and that maybe I'm just not cut out for motherhood if one baby is too much for me to handle. I went to bed that night and couldn't sleep even though Millie was finally resting. I kept thinking about what Ryan had said and wondering if he was right. Maybe I was being too demanding. Maybe other women really do handle this better than I am. But then I thought about my sister, who has 3 kids. Her husband coached Little League and had other hobbies, but he was always home by 6 p.m. on weekdays to help with dinner and bedtime routines. My own father worked construction and was exhausted every day, but he still helped my mother with us kids in the evenings. The next morning, I decided to try one more time with David. I waited until he was having his coffee before work and calmly explained my situation again. I told him I wasn't trying to stop him from working out, but I needed some help during Millie's fussy periods. I asked if he could come home just 2 days a week, maybe Tuesday and Thursday, so I could have a short break. David listened and nodded, then said he would think about it. That evening, he texted me at 5:30 p.m. saying he was at the gym and would see me later. Same thing happened the next day, and the day after that. On Saturday, I asked him directly if he had thought about our conversation. He said he had, and he felt like his workout routine was too important to his physical and mental health to change right now. He suggested that this phase with Millie would pass soon anyway, so I just needed to tough it out for a few more weeks. That's when Ryan chimed in again. He was making breakfast and overheard our conversation. He told David he was right to stick to his routine, and that giving in to my demands would set a bad precedent. He said I would just keep asking for more and more compromises until David had no time for himself at all. Ryan then turned to me and said I needed to figure out how to manage my time better. He pointed out that Millie sleeps during parts of the day, so I should be using that time to shower and prepare meals instead of complaining about doing it when she's awake. He said that learning to multitask is part of being a parent. I left the kitchen and went to our bedroom. I looked at Millie sleeping in her bassinet and tried to figure out what to do next. David's gym schedule wasn't changing, and now I had Ryan reinforcing the idea that I was being unreasonable. I called my mother and asked if Millie and I could come stay for a few days. I told her I needed some help and space to think. She said yes immediately and offered to come pick us up. I packed a bag for Millie and myself, left a note for David explaining that I needed time to figure things out, and went to my mother's house. That was 4 days ago. David hasn't called or texted once since I left. Not to ask if we arrived safely, not to check on Millie, not to ask when we're coming back. Ryan texted me yesterday asking when I'm planning to stop this dramatic nonsense and come home, but nothing from David. I'm starting to realize that maybe the problem isn't just about gym time. Maybe it's about priorities and what kind of partnership we actually have. But I keep second-guessing myself because of what Ryan said. Am I really being selfish for wanting help with our baby? I don't know what my next step should be. Part of me wants to go back and try to work things out, but another part of me wonders if anything will actually change. Millie is David's daughter too, but he doesn't seem interested in being present for the hard parts of parenting. What would you do in my situation? Am I wrong to expect my partner to adjust his routine to help with our newborn? Update 1. A lot has happened since my original post, and I wanted to update everyone who gave me advice and support. Your responses really opened my eyes to things I hadn't considered before. After staying at my mother's house for a week, I decided to go back home and have a serious conversation with David. I thought maybe if I approached things differently and explained my needs more clearly, we could work something out. I was wrong. When I got home, David was getting ready to leave for the gym. He barely acknowledged that Millie and I had been gone for a week. He didn't ask how we were, didn't seem relieved that we were back safely, nothing. He just grabbed his gym bag and said he'd see me later. That evening when he came home around 10 p.m., I tried to start a conversation about our relationship and what needed to change. David's response was that he didn't see what the big deal was. He said I had chosen to leave, not him, so clearly I was the one with the problem. He told me that plenty of military wives handle deployments alone with kids, so I should be able to handle him being gone for a few hours each evening. When I pointed out that this wasn't a temporary deployment but an ongoing choice he was making every single day, he got annoyed. He said his gym routine was non-negotiable and that I knew he was serious about fitness when we got together. He claimed I was trying to change him into someone he's not. I asked him what he thought his role should be as Millie's father. His answer was that he would be more involved when she got older and could do interesting things like go to playgrounds or play catch. Right now, she was basically just eating, sleeping, and crying, so there wasn't much for him to contribute. This conversation happened while Ryan was watching TV in the living room, and he kept making comments throughout. He would nod when David said something and shake his head when I spoke. At one point he actually said that I was being manipulative by timing this conversation for when David was tired from his workout. The next morning, I woke up to Millie crying at 5 a.m. David didn't even stir. I got up to feed her, and when I came back to the bedroom, he was awake and scrolling through his phone. I asked if he could take Millie for an hour so I could get some more sleep since I'd been up multiple times during the night. He said he couldn't because he needed to get ready for work soon, and besides, Millie would just cry if he took her since she only wanted me anyway. Then he got up and went to take a long shower while I sat there with Millie, who was still fussing and refusing to go back to sleep. This pattern continued for several days. David would leave for work, go straight to the gym afterward, come home late, eat dinner, and go to bed. Meanwhile, I was handling all night wakings, all daytime care, all household tasks, everything. He acted like his only responsibility was his job, and everything else was my department. The breaking point came last Friday. Millie had been particularly difficult that week. She was going through a growth spurt and wanted to nurse constantly. I was exhausted and hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in days. I had also started getting mastitis, which made nursing painful and gave me flu-like symptoms. I texted David at work asking if he could please come straight home that evening because I was sick and needed help. He responded that he had already committed to meeting his gym buddy for their weekly heavy lifting session and couldn't cancel. He suggested I call my mother if I really needed help. When I told him I had mastitis and felt like I had the flu, he said it was probably just normal tiredness from being a new mom and that I was being dramatic. He said he'd pick up some Tylenol for me on his way home from the gym. That evening was the worst yet. Millie cried from 6 p.m. until after 11 p.m. Every time she latched on to nurse, I had shooting pains through my breast. I had chills and body aches from the infection. At one point I got so dizzy that I had to sit on the bathroom floor with Millie because I was afraid I might drop her. Ryan was home that evening because he had called in sick to work. Instead of offering to help, he kept coming out of his room to complain about the noise. He asked if there was something wrong with Millie since she was crying more than usual. When I explained that she was cluster feeding and I was sick, he said I should take her to the doctor instead of letting her scream all evening. When David finally came home at 10:30 p.m., Millie had exhausted herself and was sleeping. He found me on the couch with a fever of 101 degrees. Instead of being concerned, he seemed irritated that I looked so disheveled. He asked if I had gotten anything done around the house that day, since he noticed the dishes weren't washed and there was no dinner prepared. I stared at him and realized something had fundamentally changed in how I saw him. This wasn't the same person I had fallen in love with. This wasn't someone who cared about me or our daughter. This was someone who saw us as obligations that were interfering with his preferred lifestyle. The next morning, I called my doctor about the mastitis and made an appointment for Monday. Then I called my mother and asked if Millie and I could come stay again, this time for longer. I told her I needed to make some serious decisions about my relationship. I packed more clothes this time and left another note for David. I explained that I was sick, our daughter needed more attention than I could provide alone, and his unwillingness to help was making everything worse. I said I needed time to figure out if this relationship was working for any of us. This time, David did text me. But not to ask about Millie or check on my health. He texted me Sunday evening asking when I was coming back because he had run out of clean work shirts and didn't know how to use the washing machine. I didn't respond to that text. On Monday, after seeing my doctor and getting antibiotics for the mastitis, I texted him back saying I wouldn't be returning until he was ready to have an honest conversation about sharing parental responsibilities. His response was immediate and angry. He said I was being ridiculous and using Millie as a weapon against him. He claimed he worked hard all day to provide for us, and that should be enough contribution to the family. He said if I wanted help with childcare, I should hire someone instead of expecting him to give up his personal time. Then he said something that really revealed his true feelings. He texted that he never signed up to be a stay-at-home dad, and that traditional gender roles exist for a reason. He said men are naturally better at providing financially while women are naturally better at nurturing children. When I responded that I had also worked full-time before Millie was born and had contributed financially to our household, he said that was different because my job wasn't as demanding as his. He claimed that since I was staying home now anyway, childcare was obviously my responsibility. The final text in that conversation was him saying that if I didn't like our arrangement, maybe I wasn't ready to be a mother yet. He suggested that some women just aren't cut out for the sacrifices that parenthood requires. I screenshot all of these messages and showed them to my mother. She was appalled, especially at his comment about me not being ready to be a mother. She pointed out that he was the one who seemed unprepared for parenthood, since he expected to continue his pre-baby lifestyle without any changes. It's been a week since that text conversation, and David hasn't reached out again. Ryan has sent me a few messages saying I'm tearing the family apart and that David is miserable without us. But when I asked Ryan to put David on the phone so we could talk, Ryan said David was at the gym and would call me later. He never did. I've been doing a lot of thinking during this time at my mother's house. With her help, taking care of Millie has been manageable. She watches Millie for an hour each morning so I can shower and eat breakfast. In the evenings, she helps during Millie's fussy time so I can take breaks when needed. This is what partnership looks like, sharing the load so nobody gets overwhelmed. Millie is actually doing better here too. The mastitis cleared up quickly once I could rest and take my antibiotics on schedule. Millie's colic seems less severe when I'm not stressed and exhausted all the time. She's even started sleeping for longer stretches at night. I'm starting to realize that the problem was never just about David's gym schedule. The gym was just a symbol of his priorities. He prioritized his wants over his family's needs, and he had no intention of changing that. Even when I was literally sick with an infection, his workout was still more important than helping his partner and child. I think I know what I need to do, but I'm scared to take that final step. Millie deserves better than a father who sees her as an inconvenience. I deserve better than a partner who thinks providing financially is the only contribution he needs to make to our family. I'm going to give David one more chance to step up, but this time I'm not going to beg or negotiate. I'm going to clearly state what needs to change and give him a choice. Either he becomes a real partner and father, or Millie and I will build our lives without him. Update 2: I need to update everyone because the situation has gotten more complicated than I expected. Some of you might remember my posts about David prioritizing his gym routine over helping with our newborn daughter Millie. After my last update, I decided to give David one final opportunity to step up as a partner and father. I arranged for us to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop near our house, to have a serious conversation about our future. David showed up 20 minutes late because he had stopped at the gym first for what he called a quick session. He seemed annoyed that I had asked him to meet during what would normally be his workout time. This was already not a great start. I laid out my position clearly. I told him that I needed him to be present and involved as a father and partner. I explained that this meant coming home directly after work at least 3 days per week to help with Millie's evening routine. I said I needed him to take some night feeding so I could get adequate sleep. I also asked him to take responsibility for some household tasks since I was handling all of the childcare. David listened, but his response made it clear that he had no intention of changing anything. He said that he had been thinking about our situation, and he believed the real problem was that I had unrealistic expectations about parenthood. He claimed that most couples divide responsibilities along traditional lines, with men focusing on providing income and women managing the home and children. He told me that his gym routine was essential for his mental health and job performance, which ultimately benefited our family financially. He said that asking him to sacrifice his well-being for what he called my convenience was selfish. He suggested that I should be grateful he was maintaining his physical fitness instead of letting himself go like many new fathers do. When I pointed out that I was also sacrificing my well-being by getting no sleep and having no personal time, he said that was different because I had chosen to stay home with Millie. He claimed that if I really wanted more freedom, I should go back to work and we could put Millie in daycare. I asked him what he thought his role as Millie's father should be. His answer was that he would definitely be more involved when she got older and could participate in activities he enjoyed, like sports or hiking. For now, since babies mainly needed feeding and diaper changes, he felt his time was better spent maintaining his income and health. The conversation ended with David saying he thought I was going through some kind of postpartum phase that was making me unreasonable. He suggested I talk to my doctor about medication to help with what he called my mood issues. He said once I got my hormones under control, I would probably see things more clearly and appreciate the stability he provided. I left that meeting knowing my relationship was over, but I still wasn't prepared for what happened next. 2 days later, I went to our house while David was at work to pack more of Millie's and my belongings. I had decided to stay at my mother's house indefinitely while I figured out next steps. Ryan was there, just getting up from his night shift sleep. Ryan seemed surprised to see me and asked if David knew I was coming by. When I explained that I was collecting more clothes and baby items, he got agitated. He said I was being manipulative by taking Millie away from her father, and that I was using the baby to punish David for not giving in to my demands. Then Ryan told me something that completely changed my understanding of the situation. He said that David had been complaining about our relationship problems to people at the gym, and that several of his workout buddies had been encouraging him to stand firm against what they called my attempts to control him. According to Ryan, David's gym friends had been telling him that many women try to trap men with babies and then use the children to restrict their freedom. They had apparently advised David that giving in to any of my requests would lead to me making more and more demands until he had no independence left. Ryan said that David's longest gym sessions weren't actually just about working out. After his exercise routine, David would sit in the juice bar area and vent to his friends about home life. They would reassure him that he was being reasonable and that I was the problem. This explained why David's gym visits had gotten longer after Millie was born, and why he seemed so confident that his position was justified. He had created an echo chamber of men who reinforced his belief that any compromise on his part would be a sign of weakness. But Ryan wasn't finished. He then told me that David had been discussing the possibility of breaking up with me, but he was worried about child support payments. Apparently, David had been researching his potential financial obligations and was concerned about how much of his income he might have to pay if we separated. Ryan said David's plan was to wait and see if I would eventually give up on asking for help and just accept the current arrangement. If I continued to push for changes, David was prepared to end the relationship, but he wanted to make sure he could minimize his financial responsibilities first. I was shocked by this information, but Ryan wasn't done revealing things. He told me that David had already been talking to a lawyer friend from the gym about custody arrangements. The lawyer had apparently told David that if he could document that I had taken Millie away from home multiple times, it might help his case for arguing that I was an unstable parent. This explained why David had never called or texted when Millie and I stayed at my mother's house. He wasn't worried about our safety or well-being, He was potentially building a case against me. Ryan seemed to realize he had said too much, because he quickly tried to backtrack. He said he was only telling me this because he thought I should know what I was up against. He claimed he actually wanted us to work things out, but that I needed to be more realistic about what David was willing to offer. I finished packing and left without saying much to Ryan. I was too stunned to process everything he had told me. When I got back to my mother's house, I immediately called a family lawyer to get advice about my rights and options. The lawyer confirmed that David's strategy was not uncommon. Some parents do try to characterize the other parent as unstable or unfit when they're preparing for custody battles. She advised me to document everything: David's absence from parenting duties, his refusal to help when I was sick, his statements about not wanting to be involved until Millie was older. She also told me that David's financial concerns were overblown. Child support calculations are based on both parents' incomes and custody arrangements. If David wanted minimal custody time, he would indeed pay more support, but that would be because he was choosing not to parent, not because the system was unfair to him. Armed with this information, I decided to stop trying to save my relationship with David. Instead, I started focusing on protecting Millie's and my future. I began documenting David's lack of involvement, keeping records of his gym schedule, and saving all of our text conversations. I also started making practical plans for supporting myself and Millie long term. I researched daycare options and began looking for part-time work that would allow me to provide for us while still being present for Millie's early months. The hardest part was accepting that David had never been the partner I thought he was. The person who supported me during pregnancy and seemed excited about becoming a father had apparently been an act. The real David was someone who saw fatherhood as an optional activity and partnership as a burden on his personal freedom. 3 weeks after my conversation with Ryan, David finally called me. He didn't ask about Millie or express any concern about how we were doing. Instead, he asked when I was planning to stop playing games and come home. He said he had been patient with my dramatics, but enough was enough. I told him I wasn't coming back, and that I would be filing for custody and support arrangements through the court system. His response was immediate anger. He accused me of being vindictive and using Millie as a weapon. He said he had tried to be understanding about my postpartum issues, but I was clearly determined to destroy our family. Then he said something that confirmed everything Ryan had told me. He said that if I wanted to make this difficult, he was prepared to fight for custody. He claimed that since I had repeatedly taken Millie away from her home, he had grounds to argue that I was an unfit mother. He said his lawyer had advised him that courts don't look favorably on mothers who use children to manipulate their fathers. I stayed calm and told him that I had also spoken with a lawyer, and that documenting a father's absence and refusal to participate in childcare was actually more relevant to custody decisions than a mother seeking support from her family during difficult times. David seemed surprised that I had gotten legal advice. He became less aggressive and tried a different approach. He said that maybe we could work something out without involving lawyers. He suggested that if I came back home, he might be willing to adjust his schedule occasionally to help with Millie. I told him it was too late for compromises. I had given him multiple opportunities to step up as a father and partner, and he had chosen his gym routine over his family every time. I said that Millie deserved a father who wanted to be involved in her life, not someone who saw her as an inconvenience he might tolerate when convenient. The call ended with David saying I would regret making this decision. He said I was throwing away a stable relationship over minor disagreements about scheduling, and that I would struggle as a single mother. He claimed that Millie would suffer because of my selfishness. Since that conversation, David has made no effort to see Millie or ask about her well-being. He hasn't offered to provide any financial support or help with her care. His actions continue to prove that his threats about fighting for custody were empty. He doesn't actually want the responsibility of parenting. I'm now living with my mother while I get back on my feet financially and emotionally. Millie is thriving with the consistent care and attention she receives here. She's sleeping better, her colic has improved significantly, and she's hitting all her developmental milestones. I've started working part-time remotely for my old company, and I'm interviewing for full-time positions that would allow me to support Millie and myself independently. It's challenging, but I feel more optimistic about our future than I have in months. Update 3: I wanted to give everyone a final update on my situation with David and let you know how things have turned out for Millie and me. It's been about 4 months since I first posted about David prioritizing his gym routine over helping with our newborn daughter. A lot has happened since then, and I think it's important to share how everything resolved. After my last update, David and I went through the legal process of establishing custody and support arrangements. Despite his earlier threats about fighting for custody, David made no real effort to pursue shared parenting time. His lawyer submitted a proposal requesting every other weekend visitation, with no overnight stays until Millie turned 2 years old. Even this minimal arrangement proved to be more than David actually wanted. During our first court-mandated mediation session, David's attorney had to repeatedly prompt him to pay attention because he kept checking his phone. When the mediator asked David to describe his relationship with Millie and his plans for their time together, his answers were vague and focused mainly on activities he might do with her when she got older. The mediator asked David specific questions about Millie's current routine, her feeding schedule, her preferences for being soothed when upset, and her sleep patterns. David couldn't answer any of these questions. He admitted that he had never handled her bedtime routine, had never fed her a bottle, and couldn't remember when she had last been to the pediatrician. When asked why he was requesting every other weekend custody, David said it was because he thought fathers should have regular time with their children. But when the mediator pressed him about his current level of involvement, David acknowledged that he hadn't seen Millie in over 2 months and hadn't asked about her well-being during that time. The final custody arrangement ended up being quite different from what David initially requested. He was granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every other Saturday, with the option to request increased time after demonstrating consistent involvement for 6 months. David agreed to this arrangement without any objection, which confirmed my suspicion that he had never really wanted significant custody time. David has used exactly 3 of these scheduled visitation opportunities in the past 2 months. The first visit lasted about an hour before he said Millie was too fussy and he didn't know how to calm her down. The second visit was cut short when David received what he said was an urgent work call. The third visit went better, but mainly because my mother stayed nearby and helped when Millie needed to be fed or changed. For the past month, David has simply not shown up for his scheduled visits. He doesn't call to cancel or reschedule. According to the supervision requirements, these missed visits are being documented in case future custody modifications are needed. The child support process was more straightforward. Based on our respective incomes and the custody arrangement, David was ordered to pay a monthly amount that covers about 60% of Millie's expenses. He has made these payments consistently, probably because they're automatically deducted from his paycheck. However, David has made no effort to provide anything beyond the court-ordered minimum. He hasn't bought Millie any clothes, toys, or supplies. He hasn't contributed to medical expenses not covered by insurance. He hasn't offered to help with daycare costs now that I'm working full-time again. Speaking of work, I was able to return to my previous job with some modifications. My employer allowed me to work from home 3 days per week and come into the office only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On office days, Millie stays with my mother, who has been incredibly supportive throughout this entire process. The transition back to work was challenging at first, but it's been good for both Millie and me. I feel more like myself again, and having my own income gives me independence and security. Millie enjoys spending time with her grandmother and has become more social and adaptable. Millie is now 6 months old and doing wonderfully. Her colic resolved completely around 4 months, just as the pediatrician predicted. She's sleeping through the night most nights, she started eating solid foods, and she laughs and babbles constantly. She's curious about everything and loves playing peekaboo and being read to. People often ask me if I think Millie misses having her father around, or if I worry about the impact of growing up without him present. Honestly, I don't think Millie has any sense of missing David because he was never really present to begin with. During those first few months when we lived together, David rarely interacted with her beyond occasionally looking at her when she was sleeping peacefully. Now Millie is surrounded by people who genuinely want to spend time with her. My mother adores her and is teaching her songs and games. My sister brings her kids over regularly so Millie can interact with other children. My father, who was initially skeptical about my decision to leave David, now says he can't imagine Millie's life being better with someone who showed so little interest in being her parent. I've also learned some disturbing things about David's behavior during our relationship that I hadn't fully recognized at the time. My mother pointed out that David's insistence on maintaining his exact pre-baby routine wasn't just about the gym, it was about refusing to acknowledge that his life circumstances had changed. She helped me see that David had approached fatherhood like it was something that would happen around his existing priorities rather than something that would require him to adjust those priorities. He genuinely seemed to believe that Millie would simply fit into his life without requiring any sacrifices from him. Ryan moved out of David's house about 6 weeks ago. Before he left, he called me to apologize for some of the things he had said during those difficult early months. He admitted that he had been going through his own issues after his divorce and had projected some of his bitterness about his ex-wife onto my situation. Ryan told me that after I left, David had expected him to help with household tasks like laundry and cooking. When Ryan pointed out that these weren't his responsibilities, David became resentful and complained that everyone was abandoning him. Ryan said it became clear that David had relied on me for much more than just childcare. He had expected me to manage all aspects of domestic life while asking for nothing in return. According to Ryan, David has continued his gym routine exactly as before. He's there every evening for the same amount of time, socializing with the same group of friends. Ryan said David occasionally mentions Millie in passing, but usually only to complain about child support payments or to make comments about how much easier his life is now. The most telling conversation Ryan shared was when David had said that having a baby was nothing like he expected. Apparently David had thought that babies mostly slept and that parenting would involve playing with them for short periods when it was convenient. He had never considered the reality of night feedings, diaper changes, crying fits, or the constant vigilance required to keep an infant safe and comfortable. Ryan said David seemed genuinely surprised that Millie required attention even when she wasn't hungry or dirty. The concept that babies need interaction, stimulation, and comfort beyond meeting their basic physical needs had never occurred to him. David had apparently expected parenthood to be something he could participate in only when he felt like it. I've had time to reflect on our entire relationship, and I can see now that there were warning signs I ignored or rationalized away. During my pregnancy, David would often make jokes about how his life wasn't going to change much because babies sleep most of the time anyway. When I mentioned things like getting up for night feedings or adjusting our social schedule, he would laugh and say we'd figure it out when the time came. David also never showed much interest in learning about baby care. He didn't read any parenting books, didn't ask questions during prenatal appointments, and seemed bored during the childbirth classes we attended. I assumed he was just processing the changes in his own way, but now I realize he simply wasn't planning to be an active participant. Looking back, I can see that David approached our relationship the same way he approached fatherhood. He wanted the benefits without the responsibilities. He enjoyed having someone to share expenses with, someone to cook meals and manage the household, someone to provide companionship when he wanted it. But when I needed support or partnership, he treated it like an unreasonable demand on his independence. The gym routine was just the most obvious example of this pattern. David felt entitled to maintain his exact lifestyle preferences regardless of how they affected his partner or child. He couldn't understand why his wants weren't automatically more important than our needs. I'm sharing this final update because I want other people in similar situations to know that it's possible to build a good life even when your partner refuses to step up. Millie and I have created routines and relationships that work for us. We're not missing anything by not having David around because he was never really present anyway. Millie will grow up knowing that she deserves people in her life who are excited to spend time with her, who prioritize her well-being, and who show up consistently. She'll learn what healthy relationships look like by watching how the adults around her treat each other with respect and consideration. I won't lie and say that single parenthood is easy. There are definitely challenges, especially around logistics and finances. But it's infinitely easier than trying to parent with someone who resents being asked to parent at all. The emotional energy I was spending on trying to convince David to care about his family is now available for actually caring for Millie and myself. Some people have asked if I would consider getting back together with David if he showed genuine change and commitment to being a better father and partner. The honest answer is no. The fact that he was willing to abandon his infant daughter rather than adjust his gym schedule tells me everything I need to know about his character and priorities. David had months to demonstrate that Millie and I mattered to him. He had multiple opportunities to make small compromises that would have shown he understood his responsibilities as a father and partner. Instead, he chose to dig in deeper and defend his right to prioritize his personal preferences over his family's needs. Even if David somehow transformed overnight into an involved father, I could never trust him again. When Millie needed him most, during those exhausting early months when parenting is hardest, he was completely absent by choice. I can't imagine feeling secure in a relationship with someone who showed so clearly that his love and support are conditional on convenience. Millie deserves better than a father who might show up when it's easy and fun but disappears when things get difficult. She deserves better than a mother who models accepting crumbs of affection and effort from people who should love her unconditionally. For anyone reading this who is in a similar situation, I want you to know that your needs matter. Asking for help from your partner is not unreasonable. Expecting your child's other parent to actually parent is not too much to ask. And if someone consistently shows you that their hobbies are more important than your well-being, believe them. You don't have to accept being invisible in your own relationship. You don't have to pretend that neglect is normal or acceptable. You don't have to sacrifice your mental and physical health to avoid inconveniencing someone who claims to love you. It took me too long to realize that I deserved better, but I'm grateful that I figured it out before Millie was old enough to remember living in a house where her father treated her like a burden. She'll grow up knowing she's loved, wanted, and worth showing up for, even if her biological father couldn't see that. David chose his priorities, and Millie and I have chosen ours. We're building a life filled with people who actually want to be in it, and it's turned out to be exactly what we needed.